Have you ever had moonshine? Yeah. Yeah. We got a still. Occasionally make some booze.
The two boats follow the rest of the brigade upriver. There's sporadic evidence of them at likely landing places. Ashes at the foot of white mud portage, a torn oilcloth discarded on a beach, a fly-blown pile of quills and guts from a porcupine shot by one of the Indians. As predicted, the days turn cool with dark masses of thunderclouds threatening the horizon, lightning playing along the foundations. Thunder mutters around them and leaves continue to patter the river. When the skies at last clear, the deep blue of the north is dimmed by a gray-brown haze, and the smell of smoke follows the wind down the river valley. The sun is ringed and dimmed, cut by thin, endless lines of waterfowl fleeing the oncoming winter. All night long, they can hear the train as it heads south, the hurried whistle of duck wings, the honk and yelp of crane and goose. And while all else flees they can, they drag line and portage, making their way deeper into the continent, and the bay now seems a distant memory. After a long and wearying climb up the rock portage, it is late in the day. They drop their burdens into the muskeg and drag the boats to shore. The evening fire is lit, and the kitchen assembled with the sound of pots banging and the curses of the cook and his flunky. Alexander sends out to the Indians to search for game, and they vanish into the bush. After seeing that camp was well underway, Alexander invites Lachlan and Declan to accompany him inland to scout a cabin he recalled in the area. He discovered it when he passed by the previous spring. It was an outpost of the Northwest Company, installed with great arrogance as a final attempt to intercept the passage of Indian brigades and their furs to the bay. Tur declines to accompany them with an impatient wave of his hand, citing a sudden attack of flux brought on by the incessant harassment of mosquitoes, those damnable, monstrous, bloody-minded little god-cursed beasts of the devil. They soon find a small pole shack a little distance back from the river. The lands they have passed through these many weeks is one upholstered in a dense integument of mostly spruce and the occasional pine and tamarack, an unbroken landscape of emaciated trees gnawed by squirrels and afflicted by molds and disease, and perpetually frozen or perpetually flooded earth. But here the forest is neither so dark nor so haggard, the post built in a clearing surrounded by a sward of lovely young paper birch and aspen. The opening feels like a hallowed space where medicine men gather and contemplate the moon. The north wind blows through the trees, and the ground is alive with the tremors of dry yellow leaves stirred by this cold breath. As the men enter the clearing, all feel subdued as though entering a cathedral. The silence is disturbed only by their footfalls and the hiss of leaves that rise above them, flashing in the sun that escape below the purple fringes of wrack. They lift and fall in a choreography of air and space in great secretive distance, a voice to the empty wind. They gather in the lee of the post where they tumble in a column like a genie materializing on the threshold. A raven, dark as night, sits on the ridge of the roof, its black eyes reflecting the sun. At their approach, it spreads its wings, hesitates, and flies off, its harsh voice diminishing in the distance. Alexander has his baker in his hands, and he pushes the door open with the barrel. The leather hinges are cracked, and the door grates on the floor as he follows the gun inside. Pack rats have destroyed the interior, their moldering nests piled high with trophy mounds of junk. A few old gnawed furs lie on the floor by the door, and the skin windows and rafters are ghosted with layers of cobwebs that undulate in the sudden breeze from the open door. Lachlan hesitates and decides to remain on the stoop while Declan follows Alexander inside. The Highlander stops just inside the door, he too sensing something amiss. Looking around the room, Alexander's eyes fall on something bright propped up in a windowsill. His moccasins stir the dust as he walks over and picks up the delicate thing with his thick fingers. It is a small porcelain angel with cherubic features and a broad, sad smile. His head cocked to one shoulder, eyes gazing heavenward. It caresses a golden harp. Turning it over, Alexander feels a lump in his throat. Some voyageur had carried this treasure thousands of hungry, desperate miles from Montreal. Some gift of a loved one, perhaps, a woman or a parent sending him off with this tender memento by which to recall them. But why would a man burden himself with such a delicate trifle, he wonders. Beyond the fragility of the thing itself, and evoked a fragility of the heart, not an undangerous thing to a voyageur. He had seen them several times. They were a colorful people, dressed in capotes tied with worsted sashes and shirts striped in scarlet and open in the front to reveal broad chests. They wore bright sailors' kerchiefs tied around their swarthy necks, and their headdresses were wild and fanciful, sporting all manner of colored feathers and bullion tassels. They always seemed to be singing while at work or at rest, puffing their long pipes. The glaze on the angel is crackled, and a knob on the end of the harp has been broken off. Wounded, but still capable of loving, he thinks. Very carefully, he places it back in its spot. This is a terrible smell, Lachlan says from the door, holding a handkerchief to his nose. Aye, says Declan, there be vermin here, and more, look. He points to a long, rough-hewn table pierced against the fallen wall. Knocked over so the top lies facing them, hiding from view what lies behind it, all but a knot of shaggy black hair visible on the upper edge. They all stare. The poor man, Lachlan mutters. Alexander steps forward, but the others do not follow. There's a story on the other side of that table, and one deserving to be told, thinks Lachlan, but he has had quite enough of that kind of tale on their journey. A man came here to toil his last day, and the others might wonder what has become of him, unaware that his bones are lost in some distant, tumble-down hovel to forever stare at a dark and uncomprehending wall until the wood itself rots into the soil around him, or until others of his kind come and render him with soft words to the earth's breast. He can imagine nothing lonelier. Alexander stands behind the table for a long time. At last he looks up and sighs. A final glance around, he leaves the fetid room, hurting the others before him. Although it is now cooler outside, the clouds have conquered the sky once more. It feels as if they have emerged from a dark mausoleum into a bright day. Alexander gently pulls the door closed behind him. He commands the men to gather brush and leaves and to pile it about the post. When he is satisfied there is enough, he kneels and stuffs a ball of down stolen from an old bird's nest under some twigs. He strikes sparks from his knife in a flint. Declan's eyes widen. No, he whispers. The others do not hear him. A thread of smoke rises from the duff. Soon the fire is licking at the dry walls of the post, and smoke and sparks sail high above them. In silence, they turn their backs on this wilderness pyre and return to the river, each man lost in his own thoughts. When they return to the camp, Rose wonders about the troubled look in her father's eye, but he does not speak to her of it. That night's supper is served, cheerless and quiet. When all have eaten and feet are offered to the fire and embers to pipes, Declan vanishes. Rose does not consider following. She had come to the conclusion that only a fool took an axe to the rotten bridge that one walked upon, and that undermining her father in the opinion of others could prove personally disastrous. Eyes follow her constantly, and even her habitual need to flirt is subdued. Declan wanders into the night, at first with an ear tuned to possible danger, but he too comes to a new conclusion, realizing that the true peril in this land is emptiness, the absence of warmth and succor and love. Even the desolate North Atlantic offered fish aplenty and leviathans and all manner of birds, and one crewman even swore he had seen a mermaid. But other than the strange deer the brigade had seen swim in the river many days ago, this land seemed barren of warm-blooded life. Scarce ever a bird to be heard or seen, except for the unlovely croaks of ravens and migrating flocks high above the land. He's sure that man in the post had died of aloneness, not violence. He returns to the clearing, to the still snapping fire. Sitting in the thin grass, he looks up at a proud moon that shines down into the open space, striking everything in a pale light. The shadows of the trees seem filled with secrets. He bows his head and surrenders his tears. The year of the burning, they call it, says Alistair Gordon beside the snapping fire. Alexander had asked him why he and his people had made the hard crossing into the unknown, and Alistair looked up to see others watching him. With a cough, he rose and walked to the fire and sat close, knowing they would follow like acolytes. As the tale warmed, so would they. Strathnaver, Isent, Caithness, Dornach, Rogart, Loth Klein, Gulfspeed, and Kildonan all put to the torch. Damn them, Damn them to the flames if they spread so far and wide. He talks of the destruction of his family's croft, the smell of burning wood and peat and the scorched flesh of his kin, his old aunt too frail to get from her bed, and the soldiers, the treacherous, vengeful Irish of the Royal Fusiliers, tossing in torches while holding the family at bay with musket and claymore. They had shouted that an old woman lay abed inside the house, and that vile dog of Sutherland, Patrick Seller, turned to them and said, "Damn her, the old witch. She has lived too long. Let her burn." Their croft had been burned without warning, his father and mother and 2 brothers cast out without possessions of any kind. In tears, they stumbled down the road toward the sea, their hearts as hot as the coals of their house. They soon discovered that it was the same everywhere, house after house, village after village, burned to the earth to make room for the cursed Cheviots. Grumore and